The briefcase hums like a live grenade. My mentor set me up. 50 grand in dye-stained cash and a text from Sarah. The FBI's already at my door. I slam the tire iron into the lock, but the security team's ramming my car. The Audi's engine screams as I floor it. One wrong move, and I'm buried with the evidence. Too late to run. Too late to think. The road ahead is the only way out. The smartphone vibrated against the mahogany desk, a frantic rhythmic buzzing that mirrored the pulse thrumming in Marcus's neck. He swiped the screen. Sarah's message burned through the glass. FBI at your door. Sterling moved first. He sold the feds your ledger. Get out. Marcus gripped the steering wheel of his Audi until his knuckles turned the color of bone. Rain streaked the windshield, blurring the neon signs of the Kennedy Expressway into smears of bruised purple. Beside him, on the leather passenger seat, a heavy, locked briefcase began to emit a steady, high-pitched electronic hum. It wasn't a mechanical sound. It was the whine of a cooling fan or a high-voltage circuit under load. It felt less like a piece of luggage and more like a countdown. The roar of tires on grooved concrete was a constant, rhythmic assault. It vibrated through the steering wheel, turning Marcus's hands numb. He needed to know what he was carrying. He pulled onto a narrow gravel shoulder under a flickering street lamp that buzzed with a dying orange light. The air outside smelled of wet asphalt and industrial exhaust. Marcus reached into the trunk, grabbed a heavy-duty tire iron, and returned to the front seat. With a sharp, metallic crack, he snapped the lock on the briefcase. Inside, there were no merger contracts. There were no signatures from the board. Instead, stacks of $100 bills stared back at him, ruined by a vibrant neon pink dye. The chemical scent of the ink was overwhelming, sharp and metallic. Tucked into the corner was a note on Arthur Sterling's heavy cream stationery. Someone has to take the fall, Marcus. You've always been good with numbers. Make these add up. The realization hit like a physical blow to the stomach. He was the designated sacrifice for a massive federal embezzlement raid. Before he could even draw a breath, the world exploded in light. A black SUV roared up behind him, its high beams turning his rearview mirror into a blinding white glare. It slammed into his rear bumper with a bone-jarring thud. The sound of metal crunching against metal echoed in the quiet of the highway shoulder. Two men in dark tactical jackets jumped out, their faces obscured by shadows. They carried heavy batons that glinted under the flickering street lamp. Marcus scrambled out of the car, clutching the briefcase to his chest. The first man swung, a whistling arc of wood and lead. Marcus raised the briefcase, and the baton struck the reinforced metal casing with a dull, heavy thud. The impact vibrated through his arms, rattling his teeth. He didn't think. He reacted with the desperation of a cornered animal. He lashed out with a heavy kick, his boot catching the second attacker in the shin. The man grunted, a wet, pained sound, and stumbled back into the gravel. Marcus didn't wait for a second swing. He threw himself back into the driver's seat, the scent of scorched rubber filling the cabin as he floored the accelerator. The Audi fishtailed, tires screaming against the wet pavement, and surged onto the expressway. In the mirror, he saw his side mirror vanish, sheared off by the SUV's bumper as he forced his way back into traffic. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over Sarah's name. A new message popped up before he could type. "They're inside. They're taking the hard drives. Marcus, they have everything." The betrayal felt like a cold blade between his ribs. Arthur hadn't just set the fire. He had locked the doors and called the news crews before the first spark even caught. The rain turned into a blinding downpour, the wipers struggling to clear the sheets of water. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He needed a place to disappear, even for an hour. He pulled off the main road, the car's engine whining as he navigated the flooded streets of downtown Chicago. Every siren in the distance felt like it was screaming his name. He pulled into the neon-lit driveway of a roadside motel, the kind of place that didn't ask for names, only cash. Inside the lobby, a ceiling fan groaned, stirring the stagnant, lukewarm air that smelled of cheap tobacco and old carpet. Marcus slid a blackened titanium card across the laminate counter. One night. No windows, he muttered. The clerk, a man with skin like crinkled parchment, swiped the card. A sharp, digital beep echoed in the cramped space. He tried again. The red light flickered. A tiny, mocking eye. Declined, pal. Marcus felt a cold sweat break across his forehead. Try the corporate line. The same abrasive tone sliced through the hum of the air conditioner. Marcus pulled his phone from his pocket, dialing his attorney, Robert Miller. Instead of a ringtone, a flat recorded voice informed him the line was no longer in service. Silence followed, heavy and absolute. Problem? The clerk leaned forward, teeth yellowed by caffeine. Marcus stared at the plastic terminal. The digital display read, "Account frozen." Sterling hadn't merely tipped the scales. He had shattered the machine. He was financially paralyzed, a ghost in a city that only recognized the living through their credit scores. Outside, a siren wailed. Drawing closer, the sound vibrating through the floorboards. He retreated to the car, the rain soaking through his wool coat. As he sat in the dark cabin, his eyes caught a tiny, rhythmic pulse of light. It was coming from the lining of the briefcase he had forced open. He tore back the fabric with trembling fingers. Tucked near the hinge was a small, black plastic square with a blinking red LED. It was a tracking device. Every second he sat still, a signal was being beamed to a satellite, pinpointing his exact coordinates for the police. He looked at the towering concrete structure of a nearby shopping mall garage. It was a forest of thick pillars and low ceilings. If he could get deep enough inside, the layers of reinforced concrete might act like a shield, choking the signal long enough for him to think. He accelerated into the garage, the tires chirping on the smooth, painted floor. He climbed to the 4th level, tucking the Audi into a dark corner behind a massive support beam. The air here was thick with the smell of damp concrete and car exhaust. He stepped out of the car, his boots clicking on the pavement. That's when he saw it. 3 levels down, a silver Cadillac was idling near the entrance. It was the same car he'd seen 2 miles back. And then, the roar of a motorcycle engine echoed through the hollow space, a snarling, aggressive sound that bounced off the walls. A man on a black sport bike rounded the corner, his visor dark. He didn't look like a patrolman. He looked like a hunter. The bike leaned low as it accelerated toward Marcus. A flash of silver caught the light, a badge pinned to a civilian jacket, a corrupt cop moonlighting for Sterling's private security. The motorcycle surged forward. Marcus dived behind a concrete pillar just as a gunshot cracked, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. A chunk of concrete exploded near his head, the dust stinging his eyes. He scrambled toward a heavy steel service door, his lungs burning. Behind him, the motorcycle tires screeched as the rider corrected his path. Marcus reached the door and yanked it open. He glanced back to see the silver Cadillac roaring up the ramp, blocking his only exit. He threw himself through the doorway and slammed the handle down just as a heavy security gate began to descend, its chain-link mesh rattling like a guillotine. He slid under the closing gap, the metal teeth of the gate missing his heels by inches. He found himself in a narrow, dimly lit service corridor. The air smelled of grease and old cardboard. He leaned against the wall, gasping for air, the briefcase still clutched in his hand. He needed a way out, a lifeline. He felt along the interior of the briefcase again, his fingers catching on a hidden seam in the false bottom. He ripped it open. Inside was a small plastic bag containing a burner phone and a set of keys to a Ford sedan. There was no note, but the presence of the keys felt like a deliberate gift. Perhaps someone in Sterling's inner circle, maybe even Sarah, despite the raid, was playing both sides. He felt a surge of hope, a belief that he wasn't entirely alone in the dark. He found the Ford in the lower employee lot, a nondescript gray vehicle that smelled of pine air freshener. He climbed in and powered on the burner phone. The screen glowed, showing only one contact in the address book. Emergency help. Marcus didn't hesitate. He needed a path out of the city, a way to bypass the roadblocks he knew were forming. He pressed the call button. The phone didn't ring. Instead, a synthesized robotic voice answered immediately. "Thank you for calling the Federal Bureau of Investigation tip line. Your voice and location are being recorded for use as evidence in a federal proceeding. Please state your confession after the tone." The hope that had sustained him for the last 10 minutes vanished, replaced by a cold, hollow vacuum. Subverted Phase 1. Build hope. Marcus stared at the screen, his mind racing to find a logical explanation. It had to be a mistake, or perhaps a coded way to reach an undercover contact. He remembered Sterling's obsession with purity and security. Sterling always kept a back door, a way for his favored lieutenants to escape if a deal went south. The burner phone was a classic tradecraft move. It made perfect sense. Sterling would provide a clean line that bypassed the local police, ensuring Marcus could reach a safe house without being intercepted by Right Turn Davis or the other corrupt elements of the Chicago PD. Marcus felt a wave of relief. He wasn't being trapped, he was being guided. He just had to follow the instructions. Phase 2. False positive. A second voice broke through the recording, this one human and calm. "This is Agent Martinez. We've been waiting for this call, Marcus. We know you're being framed. We have the evidence of Sterling's offshore accounts. But we need your verbal authorization to unlock the encrypted ledger you're carrying. Just stay on the line. We're tracking your signal now to send a recovery team. You're safe now. Just breathe." Marcus leaned his head back against the headrest, his shoulders finally dropping from his ears. The nightmare was ending. He had the briefcase, he had the feds on his side, and in an hour, he'd be in a secure room telling them everything. Phase 3. The crack. He closed his eyes, listening to the hum of the heater in the Ford. But then, he heard a sound, a faint, rhythmic clicking on the other end of the line. It wasn't the sound of a professional office. It was the sound of someone washing their hands. The splashing of water, the squeak of a plastic pump, and then a deep, slow inhale. It was a scent he could almost smell through the speaker. Lemon-scented antiseptic. The hair on his arms stood up. Agent Martinez wasn't talking anymore. The line was silent, but the splashing continued. Phase 4. Catastrophic reveal. Do you know how long it takes to properly sanitize a crime scene, Marcus? The voice wasn't Martinez. It was Arthur Sterling. The tone was low, measured, and terrifyingly intimate. "The phone isn't a lifeline, boy. It's a leash. The recording you just heard? The one where you stayed silent after being told it was an FBI tip line? That's your confession by silence. It's the sound of a guilty man refusing to speak until he's caught. And the GPS? I didn't need the briefcase to find you. I just needed you to turn on that phone. Marcus lunged for the door handle, but the power locks clicked shut with a sound like a hammer hitting an anvil. The car's lights flashed, and the horn honked 3 times, a signal. I've spent 30 years cleaning up messes, Sterling continued, his voice echoing in the small cabin. You were a bright spot for a while, a clean tool. But now you're a smudge, and smudges must be wiped away. Marcus looked out the window. The silver Cadillac was pulling up directly in front of him, and the motorcycle was idling at his rear bumper. He hadn't found a way out. He had walked directly into a cage and handed Sterling the keys. He wasn't just a fugitive anymore. He was a recorded, tracked, and trapped piece of evidence in his own execution. He didn't wait for Sterling to finish. He grabbed the tire iron from the floorboard and smashed the side window. Glass rained down like diamonds, cutting his hands, but he didn't feel the pain. He rolled out of the car, the briefcase hitting the pavement with a heavy thud. He ran. He didn't look back at the cars or the men. He sprinted toward the pedestrian exit, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm. He reached a trash can near the bus stop and threw the burner phone inside, watching it vanish into a pile of wet newspapers. The transit hub was a hive of activity. Rain-soaked commuters in gray coats moved in a sluggish tide toward the trains. Marcus tucked the briefcase under his arm, hunched his shoulders, and merged into the crowd. He could see the blue lights of the Chicago PD cruisers flashing at the far end of the block, officers stepping out to set up a cordon. They were looking for a man in an Audi or a man in a Ford. They weren't looking for another anonymous face in the rain. He moved with the tide, his eyes down, his mind calculating the variables. He needed leverage. He needed the one thing Sterling couldn't scrub away with lemon soap. He found himself standing in front of the massive, cold marble facade of the Harold Washington Library. Inside, the air was still and smelled of dust and old paper. It was a labyrinth of silence. He moved toward the back, past the rows of forgotten books, and found a row of computer terminals. He sat down, his fingers flying across the keys. He didn't use the public portal. He accessed a deep-level trading interface he'd built years ago, a backdoor into the high-frequency markets. He bypassed the library's simple security like a hot knife through butter. He began to pull the threads. Sterling Silver Holdings. The name appeared on the screen, a ghost in the machine. He traced the serial numbers of the dye-stained cash in the briefcase. They didn't lead to a bank. They led to a private, offshore account used to fund liquidation events. The digital paper trail was there, hidden under layers of shell companies and false names. Marcus felt a surge of adrenaline. He was close. He was so close to proving that the money in the briefcase had come from Sterling's own private reserve. You always did have a talent for the deep dive, Marcus. The voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it cut through the silence of the library like a gunshot. Marcus froze. He didn't turn around. He knew that voice. It was the voice of the person who had warned him, the person who had sent the text, the person he had trusted more than anyone else in the firm. Sarah Johnson stepped into his peripheral vision. She wasn't wearing her usual professional blazer. She was in a sharp, dark trench coat, her eyes cold and bright. "Sarah," Marcus said, his voice raspy. "I've got it. I've got the link. We can go to the feds together." Sarah didn't move. She didn't smile. She reached out and touched the screen, her finger tracing the name Sterling Silver Holdings. "You really don't see it, do you?" she asked. "The way you look at the world, it's all just numbers to you. You never looked at the names." She leaned in closer, the scent of her perfume, something floral and expensive. clashing with the musty smell of the books. My mother was a mistress, a secret. For 29 years, I've been the mistake on the ledger. But Arthur is a man of legacy. He doesn't leave loose ends, he just rebrands them. Marcus felt the floor tilt. You're his daughter. I'm his partner, she corrected. And you're the audit that failed. A shadow fell over the table. Arthur Sterling stepped out from behind a bookshelf. He held a pistol, the long black cylinder of a silencer attached to the barrel. He looked around the quiet room, his eyes counting the ceiling tiles, then settled on Marcus. The library, Sterling mused. A place for stories that have already ended. How poetic. He gestured with the gun toward the exit. Walk, slowly. Sarah will take the briefcase. If you speak, if you trip, if you even breathe too loudly, I will end this story right here between the biographies and the fiction. They moved through the library like ghosts. Outside, a long black limousine idled at the curb, its engine a low, predatory growl. Sterling forced Marcus into the back seat, the door clicking shut with a finality that felt like a coffin lid. We're going to the airfield, Marcus, Sterling said, settling into the plush leather opposite him. Your apartment has already been staged. A bottle of scotch, a handful of pills, and a very convincing note explaining how the guilt of the embezzlement became too much to bear. By the time the sun comes up, the case will be closed. The FBI gets their win, I get my purity, and you get to be a cautionary tale. The limo surged forward, weaving through the rain-slicked streets. Marcus sat in the darkness, the silver coin in his pocket feeling heavy against his leg. He looked at Sarah, who was staring out the window, her reflection a pale mask in the glass. You think you've won? Marcus said, his voice calm, his mind clicking into the metronomic rhythm of a high-frequency trade. But you forgot one thing, Arthur. You taught me to always hedge my bets. Sterling chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. There are no bets left to make, boy. You're out of chips. I didn't just look at the accounts at the library, Marcus said. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Sterling's. I set up a dead man's switch, a recurring automated wire transfer. Every 60 seconds, $1 million is being moved from Sterling Silver Holdings into the FBI's Seized Assets Fund. The trail isn't hidden anymore. It's a neon sign pointing directly at your heart. Sterling's smile vanished. He pulled a tablet from the seat pocket, his fingers trembling as he logged into his private accounts. His face went pale, the color of ash. You can't, he hissed. That's 40 years of work. It's a liquidation, Marcus said, just like you wanted. The limo slowed as it approached the gates of the private airfield. In the distance, the blue and red lights of a dozen police cruisers were already visible, racing toward the terminal. The sudden, massive movement of funds had triggered every alarm in the federal system. The driver slammed on the brakes as the FBI task force swerved to block the road. Marcus didn't wait. He lunged across the seat, grabbing Sterling's wrist. The gun discharged, the muffled thwip of the silenced shot shattering the partition glass. They struggled in the cramped, dark space. Marcus felt a surge of adrenaline, a raw, human desperation that no equation could predict. He slammed his elbow into Sterling's chest, hearing the satisfying crack of a rib. He grabbed the gun and tossed it into the footwell, then kicked the door open. He tumbled onto the wet tarmac, the rain cooling his face. Federal agents, get on the ground. The voice was Jennifer Martinez's. She was at the front of the line, her weapon drawn, her face a mask of grim determination. Marcus stayed down, his hands behind his head. He watched as the agents swarmed the limo, pulling Sterling and Sarah out into the light. Sterling was screaming about his legacy, his silver hair plastered to his forehead, looking like a broken, old man. Martinez walked over to Marcus, her boots splashing in the puddles. She looked down at him, then at the burner phone he'd pulled from the limo's seat pocket, the one he'd used to record every word of Sterling's confession during the drive. "You've got a lot of explaining to do, Thorne," she said. But her voice lacked the edge it had before. "The numbers don't lie, Agent," Marcus said. "I just had to make sure the right people were reading them." An hour later, Marcus sat in a quiet diner on the edge of Lake Michigan. The sun was beginning to bleed over the horizon, turning the gray water into a shimmering sheet of gold. The air smelled of burnt coffee and maple syrup. He was penniless. His career was a memory. His reputation was a scorched field. He pulled the silver coin from his pocket and placed it on the table. He didn't flip it. For the first time in his life, he didn't need to know the odds. He looked at his reflection in the dark surface of his coffee, seeing a man who was no longer a pawn, no longer a variable in someone else's equation. He was free. And for once, the math was perfect.